to another episode of the Rock and Roll Research Podcast. Super excited to invite a former colleague of mine, Rick Garlick from Magid and Associates. That's a hard G, Magid, for those that don't know. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Hey, it's great to be with you. It's nice to see you again. You're looking good.
Likewise.
Glad to hear you having this successful podcast experience.
Well, we'll see. It's early days, but it's fun. So a couple things about Rick. Let me sing your praises real quickly, if you don't mind.
No, please go ahead.
First of all, Rick is a highly sought after consultant in the travel and hospitality space. Rough time for that, but nevertheless, if you're looking for a way out, some clear space, Rick's a good person to talk to. He's been doing that for a good long time and really knows his stuff, and really enjoyed working with him. He also knows a thing or two about Elvis, which we're going to talk about today. And I have to pull a prop because I am a very big Elvis. So
you have the first album.
This one, my 15-year-old daughter, and I would pull it out from time to time, and we swing dance in the living room. So I'm
now,
a huge fan.
Is that an original copy?
Let's see. I think so. Maybe not first pressing, but
okay.
But it's old and beat up. That much I know.
And quickly, what's your favorite song on the album?
Boy, which one is on here? Well, it's hard to not choose Blue Suede Shoes, but
yeah, I figured.
But I'm a fan of the full catalog, so
there you go.
I'm here for that. Excellent. Well, super excited to have you, Rick. We're just going to ask you a few questions today. Of course, I'd love to get to the fun stuff, but before we do that, tell us a little bit about your career, your story, where you started, and how you got to where you're at.
Sure. So you had referenced my love of Elvis, that up until about my junior in high school, my goal was to be the next Elvis. But I sort of woke up at some point, and my father told me that he wasn't going to encourage that. So at that point, I thought, well, what other things would I like to do? And I always loved teaching. When I was in 7th grade, I had my first teaching experience. I taught my 7th grade colleagues on comic books as literature. So my teacher let me get up, and I was a great comic fan and talked about the parallels between some of the superheroes and some of the mythological characters that we had studied about just weeks before. And that gave me a great love for teaching. So for a long time, I wanted to become a teacher, professor. And whenever I hit sort of the buzzsaw of all the academic politics, I thought, well, I was fortunately trained in a PhD program that gave me a lot of marketable skills. I was trained in a very heavy quantitative research program that was considered, in its discipline to be one of the best in the country at Michigan State. And so I took these skills and I found other ways to teach besides the traditional classroom. So I've always considered my students to be, or my clients to be my students, not in the traditional sense, but always looking to see what can I teach people about their business that they didn't know. I had a colleague one time who I think said the most insightful thing. He said, Rick, let's face it, you probably don't even like research except that it gives you something interesting to talk about on the stage. So I've always loved being on the stage, and I've always loved giving people those interesting insights about their business that they didn't know, and particularly things that are helpful in terms of improving their business, particularly during stressful times like this.
Sure. Great. So you started out with an interest in Elvis, and you actually brought that to fruition to some extent. So love to hear that story and maybe your favorite experience along the way.
Yeah. So, people looking at me on this podcast will say, boy, this guy in his best day didn't look as good as Elvis did in his worst day, which I accept. But, I always just loved Elvis, and I loved his music from the time I was 7 years old. My father took me to see Viva Las Vegas in the movie theater, and like many young people, just blown away. And even though the Beatles were popular at the time, and I like the Beatles, don't get me wrong, Elvis was my guy. And so I wanted to learn how to sing like him and be like him, like many people. And I remember being on a Sunday drive with my parents in the back seat of my parents' car, and trying to get that sound down, and my mother turning around laughing, going, "Well, I wonder who you're trying to sound like." So in high school, I was I did a lot of singing, performing with friends, and play guitar, play a little saxophone, and I never liked my voice because I just didn't think it sounded enough like Elvis. So I kept working out. In the meantime, I was in a number of performing groups, and particularly of that genre. Again, rock and roll being a wide spectrum of acts and interests, right? So liking that 50s doo-wop and the early days of rock and roll. My friends and I like to perform, and I always did a lot of Elvis songs. But where I really got serious with it is when I was a sophomore in college. A girl I had been dating was doing an internship for a recreation major at an elementary school. And her assignment was to create activities for the school to participate in. So, I don't know if she was just strapped for ideas, but she called me and she said, "Hey, can you come over and do an Elvis show at our school?" I said, "Well, I sing his songs. I like his music. I don't know that I sound like him. I could really do an act." She goes, "Well, put one together." So at that time, I slicked my hair back and I had longer sideburns, and I put a black leather coat on and turned the collar up and came and just had my guitar. And the reaction was really quite amazing. The kids really responded very well to it. So I thought, well, this is something I could do as an educational experience. That a lot of kids, Elvis passed away before they'll ever have the opportunity to experience his music or understand what it was like to see him in concert. While again, I'm a very poor reflection of that, I'm sure, compared to the real thing, but at least to give kids some idea of what the experience was like. And so I started developing that, and I started getting booked in schools to come and do school assemblies. And that was a lot of fun. And, my act started evolving from there. So I moved from the black leather jacket to getting my first jumpsuit made, and
Nice.
then eventually getting scarves made. I had a scarf maker, and I graduated from playing guitar to karaoke tracks so I could move around the audience, and then went from there to a live band and had bodyguards and the whole 9 yards. So I turned it into actually a fairly nice sideline for a while. I got some nice side gigs doing it for pay.
Sure.
Warmed up Chubby Checker, did a show, if you remember, Mitch Ryder,
Wow.
who sang Jenny Take a Ride, did a show with him. Did a show with Tommy Durden, one of the authors of Heartbreak Hotel.
Wow.
And the promoter, I got hired as a backup singer for a country western review. It was at Christmas time. I was hard up for money. So I got hired as a country western singer. And Tommy Durden was one of the acts on the show, and the promoter had me sing Heartbreak Hotel over the phone for one of the people that wrote the song. And he liked what I was doing well enough to bring me on and feature me in the show before he went on. So that was cool. So I did a lot of fun things like that. You were asking me what my favorite story was. It had to be when I did the Chubby Checker show, because it was actually, believe it or not, I'm not making this up, it was in Hazard, Kentucky. And it was at this big Black Gold Festival about, celebration of the coal industry, and thousands of people. But the stage was on the courthouse, basically set up in front of the courthouse. So prior to the show, I've got my Elvis jumpsuit on and my scarves and ready to go out. And I'm sitting, waiting to go out on stage in the office of this big Southern sheriff, Pearl-esque couch. And he had this massive picture of himself, a portrait of himself behind his desk. It's just like you see on the Dukes of Hazzard, right?
Oh, God.
And Sheriff Couch and his deputies flanked me as I walked out on the stage, and that was the coolest thing. The Southern Sheriff and his deputies sort of flanking me as I came out and giving me that cover, so to speak. So that was really cool. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great. Did you have a chance to meet Chubby Checker then as well?
I was going to, and it's funny because, I was all set to meet him, but after his show, and, again, as a performer, you understand this, they had to pretty much carry him off the stage, not because of any substances or anything, but because he was so exhausted after doing this energetic act. At the time, Chubby was not a young man, And he was up there giving it his all for his hour-long set. And at the end of it, he was so exhausted that, they literally had to help him off stage. So unfortunately was not able to meet him. Did meet Mitch Ryder. Mitch Ryder and I actually went to the same high school, which was kind of interesting.
Wow.
Many, many years apart. And there were certain teachers that were coming in when he was a student that were going out when I was a student. So we swapped stories about these different teachers and what they were like. And that was fun.
Cool. So have you had any opportunities in your professional career to pull Elvis into the mix? That's question number one.
Well,
And
I have.
number two, what lessons might you draw from your days as an impersonator?
So right before I joined JD Power, I was actually hired by the Las Vegas Sands to come and do a consulting gig, a training session for all the staff, all the executive staff.
Right.
And I did it on the stage of the Rita Rudner showroom that Rita Rudner, sorry, can't say her name. Rita Rudner was doing her act. It was the Sand showroom. And after I did this, the CEO brought out a guitar and gave it to me. And having, of course, speaking to a hospitality organization, I shared that the song I'd be performing would be an example of what would happen if you did not follow the principles that I had just espoused. And I sang Heartbreak Hotel.
Great.
So I did Heartbreak Hotel and Blue Suede Shoes. And so I got to claim that I actually performed on the stage of a Vegas showroom on the Strip. And I could say it with authenticity. But, something that one of your previous guests said, I listened to one of your podcasts, and he said this, and I thought that this was straight on, is that one of the things that we're challenged as researchers is not to be boring, to bring a little bit of excitement. And, again, it's not like I get up and I do Elvis at these presentations, but Mojo Nixon once said that we all have a little Elvis in us, except for, he said, Michael J. Fox. Now, I'd argue with that if you've seen Back to the Future. But we all have a little of that in us, right? We all have a little bit of showman. And, it's really, like Elvis used to say, people used to ask him, why do you move around on stage? He goes, well, all I did was stand still. They could just listen to my records. And so if you don't bring a certain degree of, and I use this term, and you'll understand how I'm using it, certain element of entertainment value into the presentations you give, they could just read the report.
Sure.
You could just drop off a report, but unless you embellish it with stories and narratives and bring it to life for your customers, then, they're going to hear a guy up there, reading numbers off a chart. And nobody wants that. That's not what we get paid to do. We're paid to bring these research findings to life for our customers. And so that's where I've always brought a little of that Elvis philosophy into the way I approach my client engagements. And again, there's nothing wrong with making something entertaining or interesting for the customer. There's no sin in that. It's not like you're compromising the data quality, but when you can communicate well and bring that combination of right brain, left brain elements into your presentation, I think that's what people really want, because they relate to it, they connect to it, they remember it.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think that was the Steve August podcast you were referring to, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that's great. I completely agree with you. So let me switch gears a little bit. And I know we're in an interesting time in the market and for our industry. Any thoughts on what the future of insights looks like, either in hospitality or otherwise?
Well, one of the things that's a shame, and researchers who are listening to this podcast will certainly identify, is that there's no time that people need our insights more than right now. Businesses are needing to pivot. People need to understand, how do you get customers to re-engage? They need new thinking. Otherwise, they're just sort of lost in this pandemic. And there just doesn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel. Now, if you look at, historically, some of the greatest innovations and some of the greatest success stories have come out of the most difficult times. So people need our insights. I think, and again, I'm not saying this because this is what I do. I truly mean this. I think people are turning too much to technology solutions away from practitioners like yourself and myself. And technology solutions are great for capturing data. That's wonderful. I have friends who work with a lot of very innovative, exciting platforms as a means of capturing data. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself the question, what does it all mean? And that's where people like you and I come in to interpret that and synthesize that and integrate it. I've heard people make the statement that I'm drowning in data and yet I starve for information.
Right.
And, big data right now can be overwhelming to people. And yet, where I see our role is really coming down and distilling it down and making sense and connecting the dots between disparate data sources and creating that bigger picture narrative rather than what any individual study or data point tells us. And that's where, people like you and I play a very useful role in this process.
Yeah, I've certainly seen over the years that part is enduring, right? It doesn't get replaced because it hasn't been able to be replaced yet. So I think that's I totally agree with that view.
Well, and where it gets a little concerning is that, it's people believe, well, if I buy one of these do-it-yourself platforms, I can write a survey. Anybody can write a survey and ask questions. I can do all this myself. And
Sure.
and again, as someone in the industry, I say this not because, I'm in the industry, but because I truly believe it, that, you're selling if you have that mindset, you're selling the expertise of a research professional short, because we bring the experience and the insight and even the ability to interpret what numbers mean. So if you get a number that 50% agree with a certain statement, is that a good number or is that a bad number? You got to be able to have some context in which to place it. And I think that there are many people that just simply don't know what they don't know. And that's where I'm concerned that people are turning to these technology solutions at the exclusion of research professionals. Like I say, great tools and accompanied with consultative insights, it's a formidable combination, but just want to make sure that people don't simply fall into that trap.
Right. Okay, as this is a podcast, curious to know what other maybe podcasts or blogs or other media that are meaningful to you or you would recommend or that you're listening to or reading now.
Well, even though I hate to give a plug to my old company, but I will. I listen to JD Power's podcast, and I find them interesting only because they collect so much data. And so that's a podcast that I pretty consistently listen to. Also, I'm a member of a number of professional associations, the Travel and Tourism Research Association being one of them, and also the Incentive Research Foundation. And so I think during this time of pandemic where we're unable to travel, we're unable to go to conferences, people are inundated with webinars, podcasts, and streaming opportunities that they can watch from the comfort of their own office space.
Right.
And I think it's really a matter of trying to select which ones are most valuable and useful. So
sure,
those are some that I listen to. I try to take advantage of as many as possible, but I think if all we did was listen to podcasts all day, we'd probably not have time for anything else.
There's certainly plenty of content out there.
Correct. So anyway, and we do quite a bit ourselves at Magid that I think are very interesting.
Cool. Excellent. Brings us to our last question. I have to ask this, right? Tells us a little bit about you and who you are and what makes you tick. I'm guessing that Elvis might be on the list, but maybe I'm wrong. So the Desert Island Disc, the three records that will accompany you for the end of time on that island. What are they?
Oh, so I've got to pick three? Wow.
It could take hours, tough. But you got to boil it down.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go off the top of my head. That one of the essential Elvis recordings. I'd obviously have to have the Beatles, probably the Beatles 63 through 66, the Red Album. Have to have that. And let's see, what would my third one be? That's tough. I think my third one would be something by Dion DiMucci, if you know who that is. He's a singer that I had. Well, he's known for hits like Run Around Sue.
Oh, okay,
The
there we
Water,
go. There we
Teenager
go.
Love.
Oh,
played by
Dion, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
Dion. I
Yeah.
actually had the opportunity to participate in a guitar jam in New York last fall, where I was actually able to play guitar along with Dion and John Sebastian, who you might remember from The Lovin' Spoonful. He was there, and several others, and it was kind of fun because the audience got to play along with these people on the stage. So those would be the albums. I think in terms of what makes me tick, so as you know, man, after many, many years of bachelorhood, I became a married man for the first time 2.5 years ago.
Indeed,
So I've
congratulations.
Well, I tell you, it's worthy of congratulations. I don't know how I was ever single for so long, but I got a wonderful wife and a wonderful family who really inspire me and drive me on to success. And I think at the heart and the core of who I am, I'm really all about being an educator. I always wanted to be that teacher, and there are many ways to teach in our professional lives. And I learned something from working for the Gallup organization, that the late George Gallup Sr. was a notoriously bad businessman, but how he became so famous was that anywhere he went, he taught something that people didn't know.
Right.
So every time I work with a client, I try to teach them something that they did not know prior to having interacted with me. So that really is what makes me tick. I love those aha moments. And again, maybe this is back to the entertainer in me, of loving to see that reaction when you come up with something insightful that makes people go, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, that's really interesting. I hate being boring. I never want to be boring, man. And I think we should all strive not to be boring.
I've never caught you in that state.
Well, and if you ever did, I would be really ashamed of myself. It would have been a down moment.
All right.
Anyway, thank you so much for this time. It was a lot of fun. I've done many, many podcasts. This is probably the one I've enjoyed the most.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it. Well, you're going to have to send me the video now. If you don't have the video, the audio, I need to hear the real thing. So.
I've got a really good one I'll share with you at some point. So.
All right, perfect. Maybe I can link to it on the podcast. We'll see. So anyway, thank you so much, Rick. Really appreciate it. Rock and roll.
Sir. It's
all right.
Always a pleasure. Keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you, my friend. We'll see you.